Hello, everybody. It's Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Wednesday, the 28th of July, 2021. And today, what I'm going to talk about is when Oregon and California defied federal law, defied Lincoln during the American Civil War. Although California and Oregon never seceded, they defied federal law during the Civil War. When the US Treasury released its first paper money as legal tender, the two states refused to honor the notes at face value. Prior to the Civil War, the federal government was constitutionally authorized to stamp coins out of gold or silver, and that was known as specie. Those coins were known as specie. But it was prohibited from issuing paper currency. While independent banks might issue paper currency, consumers expected that such banknotes could be redeemed for specie upon demand, typically redeemed for specie on demand. And any bank failing to promptly honor such redemption suffered a loss of public faith in its banknotes, which were no longer accepted at face value, if accepted at all. Thus, before the Civil War, the Americans' currency in circulation consisted of about $450 million, of which $250 million was accounted for by specie, the other $200 million by banknotes. However, the Civil War confronted the US Treasury with unprecedented financial challenges. For example, the federal budget in 1860 was only about $80 million, but it grew to $1.3 billion in 1865, the last year of the Civil War. Taxes met only 25% of the needs, although the bulk of the remainder came from borrowings, essentially federal government savings bonds. The government also issued a paper currency known as greenbacks, which accounted for about 18% of the total funding. So I want to share some images here on the screen with you so that will make this clearer. Okay, where we see the financing. Bond issues were about 57% of the financing of the federal government, taxes 25%, and the paper money, greenbacks, then were 18%. After the February 1862 Legal Tender Act, about $430 million of greenbacks were issued. Although not redeemable in specie, the federal government tried to mandate greenback acceptance by declaring them to be legal tender, with two exceptions that required payment in specie. One was a custom duty due on tariffs, and the other was interest payable on federal bonds. Buyers normally also had to use specie to pay for imports because the sellers of goods in foreign nations would not accept greenbacks for payment. Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase proposed to make the greenbacks superficially more palatable by adding the "In God We Trust" motto that he had earlier put on coins. But Lincoln wryly suggested, well, if you're going to put a legend on the greenbacks, I would suggest that of Peter and John. Quote, "Silver and gold I have none, but such as I have I give to thee." Nonetheless, along with the banknotes linked to them, greenbacks became the common currency in the Union loyal states. Let's take a look at another screen here that I think will help explain the situation. Consequently, as this graph illustrates, greenbacks traded at a fluctuating discount to specie. At a low point in the early summer of 1864, when Grant was stalled before Petersburg and Sherman did not appear to be making any progress in Georgia, a greenback dollar was worth only 35 cents in specie. Now, this graph shows the inverse of that relationship. So as you can see, in July of 1864, it took $2.80 in greenback currency to buy a single gold dollar. Since gold was more common on the West Coast, Californians and Oregonians were contemptuous of greenbacks. In November 1862, San Francisco merchants refused to accept them at anything above the discounted quotes that I showed you earlier in the graph. In April 1863, the California legislature adopted what they call a Specific Contracts Act, which clarified that contracts entered into on the basis of specie were enforceable in specie. In other words, if you borrowed money in specie from somebody, you had to pay them back in specie. You couldn't pay them back in greenbacks because they were worth less. Finally, the California state government itself, the government, the state of California government, it refused to accept greenbacks as payment for state taxes. Now, Oregon quickly followed California. For years, gold had been the exclusive currency in Oregon. Shortly after the San Francisco Merchant Agreement, those in Salem and Portland followed suit. Portland merchants also circulated a blacklist of residences and businesses that tried to settle bills in greenbacks instead of specie. Finally, the state Supreme Court ruled, that is the Oregon State Supreme Court, ruled that it was unconstitutional to accept greenbacks for state taxes. Ultimately, greenbacks were redeemable at par in 1879, and that's another interesting but controversial story that involves the post-war period. Nonetheless, the wartime defiance of California and Oregon is a rare example of state sovereignty successfully resisting federal authority. Unlike the states of the South, neither California nor Oregon were ever invaded by federal troops to compel those two states to comply with federal law. So to learn more about how other factors aside from slavery worked into the Civil War, I recommend Causes of the Civil War by Philip Lee, and it's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other fine bookstores for $22. If you'd like an autographed copy from me, send me an email, Phil, Phil _Leigh, Leigh at me.com. I will cover the postage if you're here in the United States, and the price from me for the autographed copy will be $25. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon with another episode.